Okay, we're going to run through the SVG exercise that we did in class. I'm going to load up jsfiddle.net. And our original exercise, we'll remember we were doing SVG, and our goal here is to understand SVGs are elements, just like HTML elements. They use an XML namespace. It's not required for the browser to work correctly, but we should include them. And we can use MDN for any questions that we have, the types of attributes that we can set on the different elements that are available. We're going to draw a smiley face, and it works just like HTML. The ordering of the layers is important. And so, as with anything, when I'm curious, you start with MDN. So I'll throw in an MDN SVG and just click on the first link that pops up here. There's SVG element reference. We can start there. And we can scroll here, see all of the different elements that are available. Let's open up just the SVG tag itself. That's what we start. It tells us the XML namespace attributes only required on the outermost element. But this will help get us started. So I'll just copy this and paste it in. It comes with the view box. I'm going to get rid of the view box on this. We'll come down here and close out that tag. And then I'm going to use CSS to actually alter the size of the SVG. So we will just target the SVG tag, and we are going to tell it that we want the width to be the viewport width, so that's 100 VW. We want the height to be the viewport height, that's 100 VH, and we'll click run. And so now we see that this is turned white. There's some scrolling in here just because this is running inside an iframe inside JS Fiddle. And so that gets us started. We have an SVG area to work within here, and we want to make a smiley face. So as you may have deduced or guessed, that the element to do that would be a circle. So we can just open the reference here, and we can just go ahead and copy this and drop it in. So we will have, it will draw us a circle. So we'll copy that, hit run. So we have this black circle. And so part of the homework assignment is that I want everyone to target things using CSS. And so we can put a class on these. So we just call this face. This will be our smiley face. We can target these with normal selectors. So we can do a class selector for face. And there are different types of styling that we use here. And so for the face element, we will specify a stroke that is black and a fill, that is yellow. And so we'll hit run to see those changes. And now we have the base of our smiley face here. And so a smiley face cannot be complete without eyes. So when we did this in class, we didn't use circles. You could use circles. You could have round eyes. We used the ellipse element in class. So if we look at an ellipse, we can copy this and paste it in. And so notice some of the properties are the same here. So we have a CX, we have a CY, but instead of an R, so this was radius, and we know that by going back to look at the attribute references here. CX, CY, R, path length, which we're not using with our circle. We could talk about what that does down the road in a more advanced example of SVG. So the ellipse has a CX, CY. Those are the same. Let's check that and see. So X position, the Y position, CXCY, and then we have an RXRY, which is radius on the X axis and radius on the Y axis. And so we'll just jump over here. We'll actually hit play. So we pasted it in. It's a bit large. So we'll dial this back. Let's go with, maybe we want it to be 5 wide and 15 tall. We can run that, get a sense of the scale. It's probably still a little tall for my taste. So I may dial this down to 10. And of course, it's too far over. I like the shape. I like the size of that. So the X position here, 100. We've moved over 100 units. The radius of the circle is 50, so the diameter is 100. So 50 is going to put me in the middle. I kind of want my eye to be back a little bit, so maybe I'm going to go with 35. So we'll back it down 15 units. on the x-axis, and let's see what that looks like. So let's go 35. We'll hit run on that. So that's kind of, I like the way that kind of visually feels. It's got to come up now. So 50 down, put it right in the middle. That's too low. So let's maybe pull this up to 35 as well. And I feel like that's probably in a good position there. So um, we're going to have two eyes. So we'll just copy this and paste it in. Only this time our x, instead of being 35, so that was 15 under 50, 50 being the halfway point. Let's add 50. So let's add 15, excuse me, to 50. So let's run this out to 65. And so now we have our two eyes. This looks pretty good. And so we talked about in class, I believe I asked everyone in class, so what's missing? So we're missing a mouth. And so let's go over for the mouth. Let's just use a line. And so again, we can look through here. There's all of these different elements we could try to figure out what we want to use. So let's start with a line. And so it tells us, let's copy this. If you don't specify a stroke, the line will not be visible. So that's good to know. So let's put this over here and let's put a class on this. Let's say class equals mouth. Let's get rid of this stroke black. Take that off the attribute. Let's come over here and let's declare that we want the style of the mouth. We want the stroke to be black. And then we can hit run. And so now it goes across, right? Because we just pasted in these coordinates. So we want to clean this up a little bit. And so the best place to start, I don't know exactly where I want the mouth, so I'm just trying to pick something that maybe feels proportional. So the first thing I can do is my first coordinate, x1, y1. For the y across on both of these, I'm just going to go with 50. So let's just put it in the center vertically, so 50 on the y-axis for both ends of this line. So we'll hit run. So that just made it go across. Kind of looks like a South Park character. And then I want to shorten the line in. So I'm going to move the x1 and the x2. I'm going to bring those in. So let's just try lining them up with the I. And so the first one was at CX35, and then the second I is at CX65. So we're just plug that in for x2 and hit run. And so we shorten it down. It's still a little tall. So let's move it down. I don't know. Let's try 75. So we moved one of them. We got to move both of them. 75 and run. And so that's not bad. So we kind of have this like expressionless smiley face. He's like, hey, I'm not super happy right now. And so if you think about, we see what the line looks like. It makes a line. What's a smile look like? And if you're not familiar with the SVG, let's open our element reference back up. The terminology there, it's not curve. If you were thinking that it would be a curve, it's actually path. And you can do a polyline if you just wanted it to be kind of a weird jagged line, but we're going to do path. We want curves. And you can see this example that it opens here. It draws a heart, and there's quite a few things going on. And so paths get into it's a data attribute. It's the shape here. D defines the shape of the path. So D for definition, it's the path definition. And we have to go and look at a different section of notes on that. And so we can look at the specification for SVG paths. So there's going to be a lot of information in here. And the way path data is defined and the different commands that are available. And if we just also do a Google real quick, which is what we're going to do, but I just want to show you, this is actually in the spec, is where if we Google for this to help us, there are commands. So you can read that there are line commands. It explains if you read all this general information. We have move to commands, line commands, and there are curve commands, close path commands, and we want to draw quadratic curves. So that's the Q command that lets us draw a very simple curve. And so I'm going to take some time here. We're going to talk about curves. And so let's just comment out our line. Let's run that. So HTML comment works here as well. So we get rid of his mouth. and let's go back to path. And so I'm not going to copy everything out of this one, but we will start our path. We'll put a class of mouth on here so that we have that stroke assigned. Otherwise, we wouldn't see it. And I'm just going to leave it at this. So it's got an M1030, so that's the move command. And so this is X-Y pair. So move to 10 on the X-axis, Y 30 on the Y-axis. We hit run, and we see nothing actually happens. So I'm going to push pause on this for a second. So we're going to come back to the path. And there's not a real easy way, but if you try to visualize here kind of what this mouth will look like and why a quadratic curve will work. Quadratic curve gives us a nice smooth line between 2 points, a nice smooth curve. And so I'm going to put some points in. So these are not part of the original smiley face here, but I'm going to drop down. And so this is going to be a circle. It's just going to have an R instead of an RX, RY. And this will be a class of C point. So it's like our curve points. So I'm just going to put some points in to help me draw this curve. So I'll put a C point with a stroke of red. So that should be able to be seen. And let's do a radius of 3. Let's see how that looks. Stroke red, fill red. And that's right in his eye. So we can kind of see it drop up. So I want to position this first one where I want my mouth to start. And so if we refer back here, X was 35. Lined me up with the eye. And then I've got to drop it down. So I dropped it down to 75. So let's drop the Y down to 75. Let's run that. So maybe that's maybe a good spot, maybe a little low. Let's pull him back up to 65 here. So we'll try this. So there's where my smile is going to start. And so I want my smile to end lined up with the other eye. So I'm just going to drop this in. And it's our X that moves over. So we move over to 65. All right, so I want my smile, it's going to be drawn lined up with the eyes between these 2 points. But I want there to be a curve between these. I just don't want a line in between. And so the quadratic curve method lets us specify a point that it will find a way to fit the curve in between these points. And so we're not going to worry too much about the math behind this, but let's do a Google real quick. Let's do SVG, if I can type SVG, quadratic curve. And so there's this site point. There's a few different web pages, but this is a really great illustration, right? So we're drawing out these curves, but you see it draws a smooth curve between 3 points, and these 3 points are at a right angle. So if we want this same curve set up as our smiley face in your head, you kind of imagine that we were to rotate this around, we get a nice little smiley face. So, boy, that's an aggravating sight. We're going to close that. So we know we need a third point somewhere. So let's try to figure out what that third point would look like. So we'll just drop down one more C point here. So I know it's going to be halfway between 35 and 65. And so there's 30 between there, right? Which we offset by 15 each way. So it just takes us back to 50. So we'll leave that at 50, push run. And so I don't want that, wouldn't make a curve at all if we run a line through there. Instead, we have to pull it down. So let's pull this point down. And I mean, just kind of shooting from the hip on this value. Let's go 85. Let's see where 85. So we've got back to this right angle here. So it's rotated, but you can kind of imagine there's a right angle, and it's going to smooth fit that curve in between. So it's pulling that line towards this, and then it's going to curve away and come up. And so to draw this path, the very first command we have to issue is a move command. That's the M. We're telling it, hey, just move to this point right here. So that 1030 is not going to be right? We want to move it down to this first red dot. So our first red dot was 3565. So we're going to put this in, 3565. Now, I'll click run. We're still not going to see any difference here. And our red dots are going to be on top of this smile as we draw this. And so it goes back to the ordering of these elements. So that move command doesn't do anything. But what is known to SVG is that something's going to start here. We just haven't specified any length to this. So it's moved, it's there, but there's no length to draw the line. And so now we want to tell it, we want a quadratic curve. And so if we go back to SVG paths and we look at it, it tells us that the parameters for an absolute, so we did a capital Q, that's absolute positioning, is an x1, y1, xy. So it draws a quadratic Bezier curve from the current point to xy using x1, y1 as the control point. So we can read this as, draw me a curve from wherever we're at, right? So we did the move command, so we've already moved to a certain point. Now draw me a curve to xy going through these points. So we're saying through the control point to the end point. So the end point goes on the end. And so they probably have some examples down here, but we can double check the syntax, but it's two pairs, x comma y, x comma y. So let's go back over here. So we know we're starting our curve. We've already moved to 3565. So the first thing we're going to specify is the control point. That was this third one down here, that one where we lowered the y value down to 85. So we say, okay, give me a control point at xy, so 50, 85. And let's just hit run and see what happens. Nothing happened, right? So this is invalid. It couldn't parse it. So we still got to put that end point in there. That was this middle one right here. So we know that the x is still going to be 65. And in this case, the y is 65. So we will go to 65, comma, 65. Now we'll hit run. And so it has pulled this down and over. And of course, the mouth here, it automatically tries to fill in. It tries to close in that shape automatically. So we didn't even have to specify that across there. But that's not necessarily what we want our path to do in this case. We don't want the closed path. So we can fix that by styling the mouth and putting a fill of transparent. And so we can click run. And now the point originated here with the move to command. So you have to imagine you kind of have this imaginary pin, and the M command said, okay, move my pin to 3565 and put it down on the paper. And then the next command, that Q command, a quadratic curve, meant, okay, head towards that control point, 5085, but I really want you to end at 6565. And so then it draws back over. And so if we delete those points and we hit run, we get a nice little smile in there, and that's good enough. We've got a nice little smiley face. And so hopefully that helped you see, putting some dots where those control points are, and if you wanted to make a more advanced curve, so we'll do something just really quick down underneath here. If I wanted to make a more advanced curve, we'll keep a path of class mouth. Let's just put him down underneath here. So let's move him. Let's take everything on the y-axis down 100. So let's go to 165, 185, 165. Click run. So we've kind of just translated this down. So if I wanted this curve to be an S curve, if I wanted it to continue over and go the other direction, I can copy this. Okay, so I'm currently at 65, 165 because that was the last coordinate. So my pin had moved over to that point, right? So my pin's just sitting there. So now I'm saying, hey, okay, so from wherever you're at, you're ready to go to my next curve. All right, so on the x-axis, we're going to do a couple things. The control point, we're going to pause. We're going to come back to the control point. Where do I want to end? So I want to end, if we look at the total width of this, we were at 35 on the x-axis, and we moved to 65. So let's move over to 95, right? So that was a difference of 30. So now we moved over to 95. And so I'm going to click run, right? And so now I get this weird W shape, right? So that control point, when it starts drawing this curve, it's still trying to attract itself back to this control point. So now I want to move that control point over. So I'm not at 50 anymore. All right, so I want to add 15. So I was at 65, going to 95. So if I add 15 to 65, I want to go to 80. Click run. So now I've evened it out into a smoother W, but it doesn't give me that S shape I want. I got to move this control point up on the Y axis. And so we had dropped it down a little bit. So I'm just going to make up a number. Let's go 165 instead of 185. Right? And that made a straight line. Why did it make a straight line? Because it's exactly the same on the Y axis as our endpoint. So that control point, it's just that line is attracted to go right through that control point. And so really I want to move this control point up. So what's the difference between my first starting point on the y-axis was 165 and I dropped down to 185 for that control point. So let's take 20 off of that. So let's come back up 20. So instead of 165, let's go 145 and click run. And so now I have this nice smooth S curve going through 2 points. And so if I were drawing that out, just like I did when I have to build SVGs by hand, I did just like we did when we demoed. I can imagine I'll get out some graph paper, I'll draw it out. Quadratic curves are really easy to work with. They just pull off to that one control point. So we're doing nice, smooth, even sine waves or similar curves. Quadratic curve is what we want to use for that.